And our last presenter for this session is Roncé, and she's going to talk about the summer water deficit and torrential rains and how they are major determinants on the interannual variability of fecundity in holm oak.
Hello, so my name is Roncé, and today I will present one of my PhD projects, which is about the interannual variability of fecundity in holm oak. Indeed, holm oak, as many other temperate perennials, reproduces following a masting pattern. So for those who might not know, masting is the fact that trees in a population will reproduce all together in one population and irregularly depending on years. So in other words, sorry, I can't point, so you'll have to follow on the graph here. But if you look at the distribution of fruit production per year, you will have a lot of years with a very small fruit production, a few years with a very high fruit production, and even fewer intermediate years. So although the masting pattern has been observed for quite a long time now, its mechanisms are still quite debated. So some correlative studies have already tried to find one or a set of meteorological conditions that could predict masting, but so far no one has really succeeded in finding one very reliable predictor. So that's why in this project we try to come back more to physiology and try to maybe look more on how fruit development might be impacted by especially so different environmental conditions. So if everything goes fine, to form a fruit, first you need to initiate a flower by conversion of vegetative meristems to meristems containing both leaves and flowers. These flowers, initiated flowers, will develop in female flowers that can, so that's what you can see on the right on the top. They will be pollinated by male flowers, which is what you can see on the left on the top, the yellow flowers. That is also called catkins. If there is pollination, the pollen tube growth will grow, fertilize the female flower, and you will form what we call an initiated fruit, which is what you see on the right on the bottom. So in holm oak, that usually happens in end of June, early July, and then during summer and autumn, the fruit will develop and mature into mature fruits. So that's when everything goes fine, and we don't really know probabilities from going to one stage to another. So why are we interested in that? Because we know that so meteorological conditions are important for fruit formation, and we know that especially in a Mediterranean area, climates might become drier and hotter. So our question here is to better understand fruit formation and understand what might be the causal chain of events leading to successful fruit production, especially in holm oak. So out of the three important steps to form a fruit, a mature fruit that will be able to form an adult tree afterwards, we will only focus on fruit initiation and fruit growth and maturation, as it's very hard to monitor the number of initiated flowers because that takes place in buds. So we will wonder what are the environmental determinants of both the number of initiated and mature fruits. So to do so, we'll use data from the experimental site of Puy-Chabon, which you might already know. This experimental site is located in a holm oak forest around 40 kilometers away from Montpellier in South France. In this forest, in 2003, 4 treatments were installed. A treatment that excluded precipitation, so around 27% of precipitation are excluded, and this treatment of rainfall manipulation was crossed with a thinning treatment that removes around 30% of basal area. So we used 11 years of data of litter flow monitoring, phenology, shoot length, or different shoot length DBH, so two growth indicators, and we modeled water stress. So with this data, we constructed models. So our dependent variables, the variables we want to explain quite logically, are the number of initiated fruits and the number of mature fruits. And we divided them by the number of kilograms of above ground biomass of the plots to be able to compare thinned and unthinned treatments. So it's more an allocation to reproduction we're interested in here. So then we selected a lot of many different environmental variables and biotic variables such as growth from literature, from our hypothesis, and we had to select already a few of them to take into account covariation. And then we did model selection. So here, for example, what you can see on the left is the number of initiated fruits, so per kilogram of above ground biomass. I'm not going to say this each time. And we, in the model selection, we included some variables. So first, for the previous acorn crop from the year before, secondary and primary growth, so growth in DBH and growth in height, the production of male flowers or catkins, the treatment, mean June temperature, and rainfall during pollination. So we included all these data, all these variables, and on these variables we made model selection with corrected AIC. We did exactly the same thing for mature fruits. So the variable you can see on the left, but we also included other environmental variables, such as the number of days of torrential rain during summer and autumn and winter, the water stress from July to December, which is the periods during which fruit are growing and maturing, and also the number of initiated fruits. If we look quickly, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide. If we look quickly at the data, what you can see very briefly here is that on the top left, you have the variability of the number of initiated fruits per year in the different treatments. So in blue, the control line, you can see here that you have much less variation between years in the number of initiated fruits than in the number of mature fruits just under. So the variability between years is much stronger for mature fruits. And for the number of catkins, so on the right, it's quite in between. So this is the results of our model selection. So what you can see here are effects of the different variables. In blue is the variables that have a positive effect. In red, it's the variables that have a negative effect. If they have a star, it means that the effect is significant. Usually only significant effects are retained in the model. And what you can see also here is that you can see a treatment effect. Sometimes it's not significant, because the whole variable was retained in the model, and the effect you will see here is the treatment of, for example, on the top, the thinned effect compared to the control treatment. So for what explains best the number of initiated fruits here this set of variables. So what we can see is that primary growth here, so mean shoot length, has a positive effect, as well as mean June temperature. However, we can also see that the dry treatment has a negative effect, as well as the previous acorn crop. So now, to explain the number of mature fruits, it's exactly the same methodology. You will see that some variables are in common. That's quite logical too, such as mean temperature in June, previous acorn crop. That's okay. And very interestingly here, what you can see is that you have very strong negative effect of torrential rain during autumn and of water stress during June and July. What you can also note here is that some variables were not retained by the model, such as, for example, to explain the number of mature fruits, the two growth variables were not retained, as well as the number of male flowers and the number of initiated fruits, which is quite surprising. That can, however, be maybe not explained, but not totally surprising by the fact that if you look on this graph, you can see the number of mature fruits in function of the number of initiated fruits. And some years, so on the right side of the graph, you will see that in some years trees initiate really a lot of fruits, but none of them reach maturity, which leads us thinking that the number of mature fruits is often limited by other factors than simply the number of initiated fruits. Now, I spoke about the number of fruits, but I did not speak about the mean fruit weight, mean fruit biomass. So what we also saw, quite briefly, is that treatment also affected the fruit biomass, especially thinned treatment usually increases the mean fruit mass. And we know that mean fruit mass is usually linked with the probability of the fruit to germinate. Whereas, well, it's not very strong here, but sometimes dry treatment can also reduce fruit mass. And I added this slide because I thought it might interest a lot of people here. So this does not take into account at all interannual variability. It's more all years confounded. That's the work of one of my colleagues in my group. We looked at the question that is, can thinning compensate for a drought effect on fruit production at the plot scale? So the answer is yes. So here, what you can see, so only look at the acorns part, and if you want to see all the rest, I invite you to see the paper of Gavinet et al. Published this year. What you can see is that compared to the control, the dry treatment reduces the fruit production at the plot scale, whereas thinning treatment increases it, and if you cross the two treatments, you have almost no difference with the control treatment. So thinning for holm oak can help mitigating rainfall diminution. So what I showed you, to sum up a little everything, is that a lot of variables have effect at different time periods in the different development stages I presented earlier. So the first one, so we know that acorn crop, the previous acorn crop from the year before, has a negative effect. So we think it might influence maybe flower formation, flower initiation. The next development steps, we saw also that rainfall during pollination had a negative effect on both initiated and mature fruits, which quite logically should happen during pollination. We also saw that growth might have had a positive effect with fruit initiation. And I did not show it here, but we also know, because it was, because it was 1 year before, it was before we started this monitoring. We also know that a very strong spring water stress can have very negative impacts on fruit formation. We also know that mean June temperature has a positive effect on fruit formation, which is more or less the period of fruit initiation. And very strongly in what we saw, the most important part to explain for variability in years and success in fruit formation is what happens during fruit development and maturation, which are summer and autumn water stress and torrential rain during autumn. So it's quite coherent with literature, and that describes, some authors describe oaks as fruit maturation masting species, which means that the variability of masting happens particularly during the fruit development and maturation, and not during fruit, let's say flower formation. So to conclude, this study is one of the first looking at the number of fruits, which is quite interesting because it's more what also gives the regeneration units better than fruit mass at the plot scale. What we saw also is that drivers can have a very different effect depending on intensity and the period. For example, rain can be very positive in autumn for fruit formation, but if it's too strong, such as torrential rains, it can be very negative for fruit development. So we saw that dry treatment had a very negative impact on fruit formation, but that it could be mitigated by thinning, which can be an interesting management option, especially considering the fact that we know that aridity might increase in the Mediterranean area. And also we should take into account the fact that extreme events such as torrential rain can strongly affect fruit formation. Thank you for your attention.